This is a 16mm Bolex spring-driven motion picture camera, about which there seems to be much confusion. Now, this is the wind handle. This is the trigger release. Now, from a no-wind situation, this camera will take 21, 20, 21 and a half turns to full wind. Many cameras are damaged by people not realizing how many times they've cranked them and how hard they've cranked them. So it's 21 and a half turns. If you're winding from a zero wind situation, start slowing down at about 18 or 19 because you don't want to rip the internal gears up as they are getting harder and harder to come by. Now, how do we thread this camera? This is the loop former that you close. Remove it there. Now here we have, a little soft focus, a roll of 16mm film. We will open it. Now in this film, or in this cam, it's a roll of film that is what is on what is called a daylight spool. It's called a daylight spool for a reason. And that reason being that you can open this roll of film in daylight. What a concept. Now, if we're to thread this camera, take off the little piece of tape, which we no longer need. Now, we can either put the roll of film on, or I will usually just set it off to the side, pull off a little bit of film. Clip it with the handy little film cutter that is provided at the base of the camera. Open up the retaining arm, pull it backwards till it clicks. Wind my film back up onto my spool. Plop it down, make sure there's no looseness there. Close my film guides. Hold the little button down. Open the film guides. If you carefully hold the film so it's not touching anything as it's coming off that take-up spindle, and just let it run. Now you can take your eyepiece, which all good cameramen should have, or a magnifying glass, and you can examine your film and say, well, that looks pretty good. Or you can say, what the blank, this thing's scratching it like a plow's going through it. But since this one looks to be in good condition, I will now take the other end of my film, stick it in that difficult to find slot, spin it up with my fingers. As you can see, I've got a good foot and a half of film that I've run through this camera already. Now I'll plop it on there, take up any play, and I still will not put the door on, as at this point I want to verify a couple of things. As I run it, I want to see that that take-up spindle is in fact taking up the film. I want to see that the loop is symmetrical at both ends, and that as I've been running it, I'm losing my one light there, as I'm running it, it's correct. Even though it's self-threading, what can happen is it will slip one perf and be sitting like that. So now you're in a situation where, one, it is touching the film guide up here, which can and will scratch your film. And at the bottom, it's hitting the loop restorer. What I like to do is, I've already established that it takes up. I've established that it is not scratching film. I've established that the loop is staying symmetrical. At this point, I will put the door on the camera, turn the camera over. Now, when I film test cameras I've just overhauled, at this point I will close the variable shutter, close the eyepiece, and then I will run the camera so that on the footage counter, let's see if I can get tighter there. Now with the eyepiece closed and the variable shutter closed, now we can run it until the camera says 0. Now this does two things for us. It prevents our first scene, where I'm sure many of you kids have seen other people's footage and their first take is 80% light struck. And that's because as soon as they put the film in the camera, they closed the door and began shooting their footage. Now every new roll of film has approximately 109 or 110 feet of film on the spool. So if you waste 5, 10, or even 15 feet of film verifying that your camera is in fact loaded correctly, taking up correctly, and all else, then you're pretty much guaranteed getting 95 or 100 feet of good film. Also, this gives you, by closing the variable shutter and the eyepiece, when your film comes back from the lab, that first section of film, other than being light struck from when you were loading it, as you get deeper into the roll, you should be able to see whether or not your camera has any light leaks or if it's nice and snug. So that's the basis of loading a 16mm Bolex camera with a daylight spool. Here's a common question. How do I know if my camera is in fact running at 24 frames a second? Well, we can take these two knobs here and zero them. So we'll zero this one, and then we'll zero this one. Now, if we have a stopwatch, which all good filmmakers should have, you start your stopwatch. Stop your camera at 10 seconds. Close enough. Here you should be reading approximately 240 frames. I stopped a little early. I'd say we're real close right there. So that's how that's done.